There is a particular kind of silence that only exists at 3 in the morning. Not peaceful silence, not restful silence. The silence of a man sitting alone in a dark room with 61 years of living pressing down on his chest like a hand that never quite lifts. I know that silence better than I know most things. I have sat inside it in places that do not appear on any map a civilian would recognize, in the black water off the coast of Somalia, in the mountain passes of Afghanistan, where the wind came off the peaks like something with a personal grievance against everything alive, in the back of a helicopter over the Persian Gulf, with my hands still trembling from something I was not yet ready to name. I know it now in this old farmhouse in Cedar Hollow, Montana, where the snow falls sideways against the window, where a German shepherd breathes slowly on the floor beside my chair. His muzzle is gray now. His movements in the morning are slower than they used to be, but he still positions himself between me and the door every single night before he sleeps, still faithful, still working. Even now, even here, even in the quiet of a life that has finally found its way to something resembling peace. His name is Ranger. And before I tell you about the winter that nearly destroyed my family, I need to tell you about him. Because without Ranger, there is no story. Without Ranger, there is only a grieving man and 2 children swallowed by a Montana winter, and a secret that stays buried forever. My name is Daniel Mercer. I served as a Navy SEAL for 22 years. I operated in theaters most Americans will never read about in any newspaper. I was trained in ways that rewire a man at a fundamental level, not just his body, but the part of him that decides what fear means and what it is permitted to do. I received Ranger in 2007. He was 18 months old, a German shepherd out of a military working dog program in Lackland, Texas. 94 pounds of muscle and intelligence and a drive to work that I recognized immediately because I had seen it in the best operators I had ever served beside. That focused stillness, that complete attention, that quality of being absolutely present in whatever environment he occupied, regardless of what that environment was asking of him. Our first trainer told me something I have never forgotten. He said, "This dog will not work for you because he is commanded to. He will work for you when he decides you are worth working for. Your job is to become worth it." It took Ranger approximately 3 weeks to decide. I know the exact moment it happened. We were in a training scenario, night exercise, simulated building entry with a target asset on the 3rd floor. I was moving through the 2nd floor when the floor gave way. A structural failure in an old training facility that was not supposed to happen and happened anyway because that is the nature of training facilities and life alike. I went down 6 feet into the dark. I was not seriously injured, bruised, shaken, but temporarily disoriented in complete darkness with debris across my legs. Ranger found me in 40 seconds. He had been on the floor above. He had heard the collapse. He had navigated the debris field in the dark and found a way down through a gap I would not have seen with a flashlight, and he pressed himself against me in the darkness and stayed there without moving until I had collected myself enough to move. He did not whine. He did not bark. He simply arrived and stayed. From that night forward, Ranger and I operated as a single unit. We deployed to Afghanistan in 2008. The mission parameters of what we did there belong to categories I am not able to fully discuss, but I will tell you what Ranger did, because what Ranger did deserves to be said out loud. He found men who were alive in rubble when nothing else could locate them. He moved through environments that 2-legged operators could not navigate, and he communicated back to us with a precision that saved lives I can name and lives I was never permitted to know the names of. He went into darkness without hesitation. He went into noise and chaos and the particular violence of active combat situations, and he did his job with a calm professionalism that shamed some of the humans around him. He was never reckless. That is important to understand. A reckless dog in combat gets men killed. Ranger was not reckless. He was measured. He assessed. He made decisions with a quality of judgment that I have spent years since trying to adequately explain to people who have never worked beside a trained military dog and cannot quite believe that the word judgment applies. It applies. In the fall of 2009, we were inserted into a valley in Kunar province for a personnel recovery mission. An American advisor had been separated from his unit during an engagement and was believed to be sheltering in a series of agricultural structures approximately 4 kilometers from our insertion point. The terrain was difficult. The intelligence was incomplete. The window we had was narrow. We moved through the dark for 2 hours. Ranger worked 30 meters ahead of the team, quartering the ground, checking the wind, communicating through his body language in the way that a trained handler learns to read the way a musician reads a score. Instinctively, continuously, without having to consciously translate. At the 2-hour mark, Ranger stopped. He did not alert in the way that indicates a threat. He alerted in the way that indicates a find. Head up, body forward, one front paw slightly raised. I signaled the team to hold. I moved up beside Ranger and he led me 40 meters off our planned route to a dried irrigation channel where an American Sergeant First Class named David Okafor was lying with a broken leg and a field dressing on his left arm that had soaked through twice, and a determination not to make a sound that had kept him silent for 11 hours while enemy forces moved through the valley around him. He looked up at Ranger before he looked up at me. "That dog," he said in a voice roughened by 11 hours of controlled silence, "is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." We got David Okafor home. He sent Ranger a rawhide chew toy in the mail from his recovery facility 3 weeks later with a note that said simply, "Tell him I said thank you." I told him. Ranger destroyed that chew toy in approximately 8 minutes and seemed deeply satisfied with the entire transaction. That was Ranger in the field. That was what he was built for and who he was when the world asked the most of him. But there was another side of Ranger that the field never showed. I met Victoria in 2001. We married in 2003. The twins arrived in 2004. And from the moment Ranger came into our home in 2007, he understood something about that family that I'm not sure I fully understood myself until much later. He understood what was worth protecting. Victoria had a way with him that was different from mine. Where I was his partner and his operator, she was something else entirely. She would sit on the back porch in the evenings with her sketchbook, and Ranger would lie at her feet with his chin on her shoe. And they would stay that way for an hour while the light changed and she painted and he breathed. And the particular piece of that image is something I can close my eyes and return to even now. When Victoria got sick, Ranger knew before the diagnosis came. I believe that with everything in me. 3 weeks before she went to the doctor, he began following her through the house in a way he never had before, staying closer, watching with that quality of focused attention that he reserved for things that mattered. Victoria laughed about it and called him her shadow and scratched his ears and said he was being ridiculous. He was not being ridiculous. He was doing what he had always done, reading something the rest of us could not yet detect. During the 2 years of treatment, Ranger became something I had no training manual for. This dog who had operated in combat zones, who had navigated rubble and darkness and violence without a tremor of anxiety, became the gentlest creature I have ever witnessed. He learned the rhythm of Victoria's difficult days without being taught. On mornings when the treatment had taken too much from her, he would lie beside her bed and stay there without moving for hours. He did not need to be asked. He did not need to be commanded. He simply knew. Emma, my daughter, watched this and understood it in the way that 10-year-old girls understand things that adults have to work much harder to see. She told me once very seriously that Ranger was keeping Mom's heart company when her body was too tired to do it alone. I did not have an answer for that. Victoria died on a Tuesday morning in October, 2016. I was holding her hand. Ranger was lying outside the hospital room door. They had not permitted him inside, hospital policy, but he had refused to remain in the vehicle, and the staff had permitted him to lie in the corridor outside the room in the particular way that people accommodate a presence that is clearly not going to be reasoned with. When I came out of that room, Ranger stood up and looked at me. One look, and then he pressed himself against my legs and stayed there. He did not move for a long time. Neither did I. 21 days later, Richard Blackthorne, Victoria's father, called me into his study and told me to remove myself and my children from his property within 48 hours. Richard was old Montana money, 3 generations of wealth built on foundations I did not yet know were rotten. He looked at me across that enormous desk with flat gray eyes and told me I could not provide his grandchildren with security or stability. I thought about 22 years of service. I thought about black water and burning buildings and 11 hours of silence in a dried irrigation channel. I thought about what security and stability actually cost and who actually paid for it. I stood up. "We'll be gone by morning," I said. The night we left Blackthorne Manor belongs to a category of memories I do not revisit often. Victoria's painting supplies scattered across the snow, a family photograph shattering on the icy driveway, Emma running through the blizzard to gather her mother's paintbrushes with both arms like she was rescuing something alive. A security guard moved toward Emma. Ranger came off the ground. The sound that came out of that dog hit the courtyard like something physical. The guard went backward into a stone pillar and did not come forward again. I caught Ranger's collar and felt the controlled power of him under my hand. The growl that continued was low and absolute and left no ambiguity about the conversation he was prepared to have with anyone who came close to that little girl. Richard appeared at the top of the steps and told me to control my animal. I looked up at him. "He's not the animal here," I said. We drove 3 hours through the storm. The twins fell asleep in the back seat. Ranger positioned himself between them, his big body taking up the remaining space, his head resting across Emma's lap. Every few minutes, Emma's hand would move in her sleep and find his fur, and her breathing would slow and steady again. He was already working. Even then. Even in the truck, in the dark, in the middle of a blizzard, still keeping the people who mattered most as close to safe as the situation permitted. I had one option, my grandfather's farmhouse in the Cedar Hollow Valley, empty for 30 years, 12 miles from the nearest town. I found out its condition when we arrived just before dawn. Sagging roof, groaning porch, the smell of decades of cold and neglect inside. 2 boarded windows. But the fireplace worked. The walls were standing. I carried the twins inside and fed wood into that fireplace for an hour until the room began to warm. Ranger positioned himself on the floor between the children and the door and did not move until morning light came through the windows. He was on watch. The first 2 weeks were the hardest sustained days I had lived since active deployment. Frozen pipes, a failing generator, a roof that needed patching in 4 places. I taught the twins at the kitchen table and held the rhythm of our days together by sheer force of will. But Ranger had found something. It began at the end of the first week. He started spending long stretches of time in the northeast corner of the main room, near the old stone hearth, pressing his nose to the floorboards, moving 6 inches, pressing again, systematic, deliberate, reading something beneath the wood that I could not detect. Emma noticed before I did. She came to me one evening while I was working at the kitchen table, and she said, very quietly, "Dad, Ranger is doing his work face." I looked at her. "His what?" "His work face," she said patiently. "The face he makes when he has found something and he is waiting for you to come and see." I looked across the room at Ranger, pressed against the floorboards in the corner. She was absolutely right. That was his work face. I had seen it in Kunar province in 2009, over a dried irrigation channel with an American sergeant lying broken inside it. I should have moved faster. But there was something else happening at night that I had not told the twins about. On the 14th evening, I saw headlights on the ridge above the valley. A black SUV parked at the tree line with its engine running. I watched it for 25 minutes before it disappeared back into the dark. The next morning, I found tire tracks at the edge of the property and 2 sets of footprints in the snow leading from the tree line to within 40 feet of the farmhouse, then stopping, then returning. Someone was measuring the distance between themselves and us. That night, Ranger did not sleep. He moved between the corners of the main room and the foot of the stairs all night long in a slow, continuous patrol that required no command and no encouragement. His nails on the old floorboards made a soft, rhythmic sound in the dark that I found, despite everything, deeply comforting. He knew something was wrong. He was responding to both things at once, the thing outside in the dark on the ridge and the thing beneath the floor in the corner. On the 17th night, he made his decision. He went to the northeast corner and he began digging with both front paws in a focused, sustained way that was not anxious or distressed, but purposeful and clear. He looked back at me once with those amber eyes, and I knew that look the way I knew my own reflection. He was done waiting for me to catch up. I pulled the old rug back. Beneath it, barely visible under decades of grime and layered paint, was the outline of a hatch, a recessed iron ring handle painted over so many times it had nearly disappeared into the floor. Ranger sat back and watched me, waiting. I pulled the hatch open. Cold, dry air rose from below. I climbed down into a narrow earthen chamber 8 feet deep with stone walls and packed dirt floor. Lining those walls were metal boxes sealed in oil-treated canvas. Documents, financial records, contracts, wire transfers routed through shell companies across 30 years, photographs, land deeds, court records. And at the bottom of the third box, a trust document. Victoria Ann Blackthorne. Her full legal name on papers dated 6 months before she was born. Richard Blackthorne had built a trust for his daughter, funded by money accumulated through 3 decades of land fraud and political corruption, and the systematic destruction of ranching families across 3 Montana counties. $200 million built on other people's ruin, left entirely to Victoria, which, upon her death, passed directly and irrevocably to her children, to Emma, to Caleb. Richard had known the moment Victoria died that his grandchildren were the legal heirs to everything he had spent his life building and everything he had spent his life hiding. He had thrown us into a blizzard not from grief, from fear. He needed us unreachable before any attorney could explain what we were legally entitled to. The black SUV on the ridge was a countdown. I sat in that earthen chamber for a long time with those documents, and with the weight of what Victoria had never known about her own father pressing down around me like the cold stone walls. She had spent 36 years trying to earn warmth from a man who could not give it to her, because giving it would have required an honesty that would have destroyed everything he had built. She deserved so much better. I climbed back up through the hatch. Ranger was sitting exactly where I had left him, 3 feet from the opening, watching the top of the ladder with the patient, focused attention of a dog who has completed his part of the mission and is waiting to confirm that his partner is safe. When my head cleared the floor, he stood up. He pressed his nose once against my hand. Then he turned and walked to the foot of the stairs and looked up toward where the twins were sleeping. Still working, still on watch, still faithful. Emma was standing at the top of the stairs in her mother's oversized green cardigan with one of Victoria's paintbrushes in her hand and her hair tangled from sleep. She looked down at me with her mother's eyes. "Dad, is everything okay?" I stood at the bottom of those stairs and looked up at my daughter, and I thought about a promise made in a hospital room in October. I thought about a woman who had never known what was buried beneath her name. I thought about a dog who had navigated black water and burning buildings and Kunar province in the dark and a Montana winter and a secret sealed in the earth. and who had brought me to the truth with the same patient, deliberate faithfulness he had brought to every mission across 8 years of service. I thought about what the best of us do when the situation asks everything. We do not quit. We press our nose to the floor and we keep working until the truth comes up into the light. "Everything is going to be okay," I told my daughter. And I climbed those stairs and held her and made a silent promise to a woman who was no longer there to hear it. I kept it. The trust was confirmed. The federal investigation into Richard Blackthorne consumed nearly a year and became one of the largest corruption cases in Montana history. $200 million passed legally to Emma and Caleb Mercer. We stayed in Cedar Hollow through the spring. Caleb fixed the roof. Emma planted wildflowers in her mother's colors along the south fence. We repaired the porch and replaced the windows and made that broken farmhouse into something that felt, improbably and completely, like home. I sit here now in this old chair at 3 in the morning and I think about everything a life contains. The black water off Somalia. Marcus Webb cramping in the dark, and my arms deciding to keep swimming past the point where arms are supposed to make decisions. Charlie Doyle laughing outside a burning building, asking about his canteen. David O'Coffer looking up from a dried irrigation channel and saying Ranger was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Victoria on the back porch with her sketchbook, and Ranger's chin on her shoe and a light changing slowly around them. Emma at the top of those stairs in the green cardigan. Ranger pressing his nose to my hand when I came up through the hatch. I reach down now in the dark and rest my hand on his neck. He is breathing slowly, steadily. His muzzle is gray, and his mornings are slower, but he still positions himself between me and the door every night before he sleeps. Still faithful, still on watch, the way the best of us always were, the way the best of us always will be. If this story moved something in you today, if it reminded you what loyalty truly looks like, what love truly survives, and what a faithful companion truly means, then you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe to the 11th Hour Last Words, because some stories deserve to be heard before the last light fades, and some souls, two-legged and four-legged alike, deserve to be remembered for everything they gave. This story honors the complete arc of American military service and the animals who served alongside those men. It speaks to the real bond between a handler and a working dog, not sentiment, but partnership, trust earned through shared danger. It honors veterans who return home carrying invisible weight and find that the battles waiting at home can exceed anything the battlefield prepared them for. It shows children witnessing dignity and faithfulness under impossible pressure. And at its deepest, it is a story about what refuses to stay buried: truth, love, loyalty, and about the particular faithfulness of creatures who never learned how to give up on the people they have chosen.